You can associate a DHCP option set with a VPC. The DHCP option set contains a number of configuration settings for that VPC and its subnets, including things like DNS name resolution. We're going to get started here by going to the VPC management console. So I'm going to search for VPC here. I'll click VPC. And on the left, first thing I'd like to do is examine the existing VPCs we have. For example, I'm going to click on the VPC ID for VPC2. Notice that we have a DHCP option set association with each and every VPC. In this case, we've got the link for that DHCP option set that we could click on to view the settings of. And it's selected here. It's in a filtered view by default. That put us in the DHCP option set view as shown, selected over on the left. And if we look at the details down below, we've got the options within it, such as any NetBIOS name servers, if that's being used for TCP IP in a Windows kind of environment. We've got the domain name that will be used. This is the default DNS domain name suffix, which would be ec2.internal. We've got domain name servers, which is set here to be Amazon provided DNS. Aha! So it's here in the DHCP option set that we could specify IP addresses of DNS servers of our choosing if we wanted to customize DNS name resolution, because our applications might need it, because we're manually deploying Active Directory in EC2 instances, whatever the case might be. We even have Network Time Protocol or NTP servers that by default communicate over UDP port 123 for time synchronization over the network. But let's go ahead and create a new one. So what I'm going to do here, we're in the DHCP option set view. I'm going to click the X to remove the filter. And I'm just going to choose Create DHCP Option Set. We're going to call this DHCP Options-VPC2. We're going to change that association with VPC2. So let's assume in this example that we want to customize DNS name resolution. So I want to use my own internal domain name, maybe quick24x7.local, and I can specify, as shown in the example, one or more IPv4 addresses for DNS servers and or IPv6 addresses for DNS servers. Of course, IPv6 uses hexadecimal notation with a colon separating each portion of the address. Anytime you have two colons following one another within IPv6, it just means there's a bunch of zeros in there, so it's shorthand. At any rate, let's assume that I've got a couple of DNS servers. So I'll use a comma-separated list and specify their IP addresses. Let's say it's internal to a VPC subnet. I could even specify an NTP server for network time synchronization if I've got that configured. You're not going to be using NetBIOS name servers very often anymore unless it's a really old legacy app that needs to be supported. I'm not going to choose a NetBIOS node type. And what's interesting here is if I expand AWS command line interface command, it shows me the command down below that was generated based on my selections here in the GUI, which is pretty interesting. So I could copy it and maybe tweak it and use it for the automated creation of other network resources without using the GUI if I so choose to do that. And of course, in the tags section, the name has been set to what we filled in. I could add up to 50 key and value pairs for tagging metadata. At any rate, I'm okay with this. I'm going to go ahead and create the DHCP option set. And it takes us directly into the properties for it. I'm just going to click the X here. Let's go back to the DHCP option sets view. There's our newly created DHCP option set. If I select it and go to Actions, we can view the details, manage the tags for it, or delete it. But where do we associate it with the VPC? Not from here, naturally. We do that at the VPC level. So if I go back to the Your VPCs view, and if I click to open up VPC2, let's say, I can go to the Actions menu, and I can edit the DHCP option set. So if I do that, I can then select it from the list. So we've got the ID for it, but of course the name is shown here in parentheses, DHCP options-VPC2. So I'm going to do that and choose Save Changes. Now you need to be very careful with this because of course you are now changing DNS name resolution options for that VPC. Now you might wonder, What about EC2 instances that we already have launched into subnets within VPC2? Do they need to be restarted? And the answer is no. DHCP, the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, is set within the operating system to have a specific lease renewal time. As an example, here at the Windows command prompt, if I type ipconfig, I get my network adapters shown here, along with some basic details, in my case, such as for my Wi Fi adapter, like the IPv6 link local address, the IPv4 address, and subnet mask and default gateway. But if I were to run instead ipconfig/all, then I would get the DHCP information for my operating system, such as whether DHCP is enabled and when the lease was obtained and when it expires. Now, to force this to happen again, to force the DHCP sequence to take place now, I could run ipconfig/renew. Now, that could temporarily disrupt anything happening for this instance at this time, but we could do it. And so, even though it might take some time, depending on how your OS is configured, a few hours, a day, you won't have to restart the instances. They will eventually pick up the settings themselves. Of course, you could always manually remote into them or use a systems manager run command against multiple instances to force that renewal to happen right away. Or you could restart them if you wanted to, but the key is that you do not have to. They will pick up the settings eventually.